Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, let's go. Let's get into it. Come on. Welcome to the 27th Annual Research Showcase. I'm Dave Marica, and it is my honor, once again, to be your moderator. The DOT's theme for this year's event is preparing the workforce for the future. Cell phones, please put them on mute at this time, though we will be talking about your cell phones in a few minutes. But if you could put them on mute, we'd appreciate it. Restrooms, if you go outside this door and head towards the back on the right-hand side, there's a hallway right there, both upstairs and downstairs are the restrooms. Exits, please look at your exits. God forbid something happens here, you have exits in the back of this. If you go up the elevation here, you have exits over here, exits there, or just follow me. Believe me, I'll be the first one out to do it. If there's a problem, I see smoke, just follow me, you'll be fine. But do take, inventory on your area so that you kind of know, God forbid something happens, where you can exit. This is a smoke-free campus. So do not smoke anywhere on the premises, if you would, please. If you have any questions regarding the topic, please line up. Do we have the mics? Yes, we do. If you notice, if you look in the center aisle here, that is between the up and the lower section, there's two mics there. Please line up at those mics and position yourself, that's positioned in the center of the walkway of this auditorium at the end of each presentation. So the key is at the end. If you have a question, basically go up to the mic, and when the presenter is done, you can then ask the question to them. Certificates will be provided for attendance at the end, there's the end word again, of the day as you exit the building. This conference provides 2 professional development hours for professional engineers. You must sign out at the end of the day to receive the PDHs. We're also making available AICP maintenance credits for planners. Today's presentation and video live stream will be posted on the NJDOT Tech Transfer website after the event. Please do not bring food or drink into the auditorium. A survey of today's events will be sent to you via SurveyMonkey, so you'll receive an email to give an evaluation of today's conference. Please fill that out so we can improve the program in the future. Lastly, I would like to ask everyone at this time, I'm actually going to give you a task to do, to log in to the Wi-Fi here. Is it up? As you see on the screen here, please log into the Wi-Fi here at Mercer using your device, more likely your cell phone, for the purpose of accessing Mentimeter, which is an interactive software application which allows you to give responses to the presenter using your connected device. Our keynote presenter and one of our panelists are using this platform to engage you. During their presentations, you will be prompted on a large screen to either enter an access code in menti.com or use your camera to capture the QR code that will also be on the screen. You will then be able to respond to their prompts with your connected device. So basically, you're going to be asked to answer a question, and then hopefully the goal is to be able to see what the responses are from the audience. So it's the ability for you to connect. But it all starts with connecting to the Wi-Fi here at Mercer, so please do that. For welcoming remarks, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Eric Powers. I just want to make sure Eric was here. Eric joined the department in 2001 as a transportation planner in the Division of Statewide Planning, serving as project manager for the state's first statewide freight transportation. Mr. Powers received several promotions throughout his DOT career, ultimately being appointed to the position of Assistant Commissioner of Statewide Planning, Safety, and Capital Investment in October of 2023. Eric earned a bachelor's degree in economics with a concentration in public sector finance from Florida State University and a master's degree in city and regional planning from none other than Rutgers University. Got to promote Rutgers everywhere I can. Let's give a warm welcome to Assistant Commissioner Eric Hollers.
So thanks for warming up the crowd. My takeaway is when you enter a room, look for Dave. If he's there, it's safe to be in that room. If you don't see Dave, wait. So welcome to the 27th Annual Research Showcase. I've got an easy job today. I just have the welcoming remarks. So I'd like to thank Federal Highway and FTA, who are our sponsors, counties, municipalities, elected officials, DOT staff, NJ Transit staff, Mercer County Community College, all the folks that are involved in the research, students, the professors. It really does take a community. If I missed anybody, it's because I'm not reading from the sheet. So the fault is all mine. So thank you for being here and participating today. When faced with change and uncertainty, it's very easy to focus on the now and what's right in front of you, right? We live in the now, we live in the present. Its allure is a strong draw, right? It takes commitment and leadership to look ahead and ensure that we are allocating our resources, both in time and money, on things that address our needs today and set us up in our organization for the future to be better able and be more resilient to deal with tomorrow's challenges, right? So we always need to be spending some time, and it does take time, especially when things are going on. Research is one of those activities that checks those boxes. Not only does it build the capacity now in our students and our professors and our institutions, but it also, through the research, sets us up for a better tomorrow. So what a great thing to celebrate. And today the showcase is about you. You're in the showcase. You're what's being showcased. The students, the professors, the institutions, the private sector that supports you, all of your work, all of your commitment and the efforts you do are why we're here today, right? So this is your flex. So be proud in the moment. 27 years just with this event alone, but research has been going on long before the showcase was here. And it really is an impressive group and community that's been developed and that we've been investing in. And thank you for that. The theme this year for today is preparing the workforce for a better future. Turns out, just like research, people are a pretty good thing to invest in, right? Being a person myself, I'm fond of this notion. So how is our workforce going to be able to address the challenges that we're going to see in the future? And what do they need to be able to do their job? We're going to learn through today's panels, we're going to learn through discussions, and we're going to see through other research, how that's being addressed and steps that we can take. I started the department 25 years ago. I think one of the first events I went, because I was in planning, was a research showcase. I've seen things that were started then that are paying dividends now. I lived and we managed through the pandemic. There were technologies that we deployed that we didn't have before. MS Teams, even work from home, other accommodations, ways to move documents electronically. That didn't exist. We had a need, right? So keeping that eye on the future and dealing with what we have, today's emergencies, is something to be proud of. And we've been keeping that commitment. So, like I said, we have a great presentation. Before I go on too long, if you could please join me in welcoming Commissioner Connor to the stage, Commissioner of Transportation and a strong champion of safety.
Good morning, everybody. Just a shout out to all my colleagues here from the New Jersey DOT, but one special colleague here, Joe Bertoni, the Deputy Commissioner of the New Jersey DOT, been with the department for 37 years. He's been such a special resource to me coming here 2 years ago. So I'm glad to see you here, Joe. Thank you, Eric. Working in transportation, we're in the business of moving things. People, freight, projects. At the same time, the world around us is constantly in motion. Technology, data, priorities, it's all changing and evolving. And that means we have to evolve with it. So today's theme, preparing the workforce for the future, really couldn't be more timely, because the future isn't something out there on the horizon. It's being engineered and built right now by people like all of you who see challenges not as roadblocks, but as opportunities to find smarter, safer ways to keep New Jersey moving. For 27 years now, the Research Showcase has been celebrating curiosity, the why, how, and what if. But it's also been about collaboration, the kind that happens when public agencies, universities, and industry partners bring their strengths together. That's how innovation truly happens. Not by working in isolation, by challenging each other to think critically, test assumptions, and challenge the status quo. Development talent is one of the smartest investments we can make at the New Jersey DOT. It's not enough to simply train people. We have to create an environment that inspires them to stay. That's why mentorship and knowledge transfer are so critical to our future. Programs like our Professional Engineering Design Experience, or PEDI, connect new and inspiring engineers with seasoned mentors who spent decades solving real-world challenges. These one-on-one lessons, the kind you can't find in a textbook, and what help carry all that institutional knowledge forward to the next generation. Safety remains our North Star at the New Jersey DOT. It guides every decision we make, whether designing a safer intersection, studying driving behavior, or testing new materials. That's why our work and your work matters so deeply. Because behind every model, every data set, every test run, there's a very human goal, making sure people get home safely. And I can't stress that enough. Even though we're down probably 14% on fatalities on our roads in the state this year, we're closing in on almost 500 people who have been lost on our roads this year. I'm looking forward to seeing how the ideas being showcased today make their way into construction zones, traffic management centers, and communities across the state. I want to thank the New Jersey DOT Bureau of Research and Innovation and Information Transfer, along with Rutgers Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation, for creating this platform where bold thinking can take center stage. And for the students who are part of today's program, you represent the next generation of innovators. Every study, every experiment, every what-if question you ask brings us one step closer to understanding how to make our systems smarter, stronger, safer. Thank you, and let's have a great showcase.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, keynote address. Our keynote address will be delivered by Deborah Sabatini Henley, founder and president of Resility. Debbie founded Resility in 2004 to provide consulting services and experiential learning with a focus on values-based conduct and holistic risk management. Along with talented colleagues and a comprehensive suite of services, Resility helps bring a life organizational values and a culture that supports the ideas, perspectives, courage, and dignity of each individual in a team and across an organization. Early in her career, she served as the general counsel and chief compliance officer for two chemical companies, Sonaborn and ProxyChem. She also spent more than 10 years in legal and compliance leadership roles in AT&T, Lucent Technologies, Avaya, BP, and Avon Products. Prior to Debbie's corporate experience, she practiced law with 2 major law firms in Washington, D.C. and New Jersey, and was a civil and environmental engineer supervising construction for Exxon. Debbie is an adjunct professor for Fordham University's Law School program on corporate ethics and compliance and a Master of Legal Studies program. She coaches ethics and compliance professionals, helping them lead effectively and develop strategies for personal resilience. Debbie is passionate about helping navigate the challenges of influencing culture change, leading strategically, and addressing the potential for burnout. I got to speak to you after this is over. Janet didn't hear that. Oh, no, Janet did hear that. Debbie earned a BSE in Civil Environmental Engineering from Duke University and her JD, Juris Doctorate, from the University of Virginia School of Law. Let's give a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Debbie Sabatini-Henley.
Is this the clicker over here? Yeah, okay. So while I find a waistband to hook us onto, let me start by saying my first job, which Dave mentioned, was supervising construction for Exxon. How did I get there? So you heard I went to Duke University. My dad is still at 93, a practicing architect and civil engineer, and got his degree at City College in New York for free. We spent a little more than that on my Duke education. I grew up in Ramsey, in Bergen County, for those of you who know Bergen County. So I learned how to drive on Route 17, Route 4, Route 46, and imagine my surprise when I saw the intersection of Route 17 and Route 4 in my transportation engineering textbook. It was, a pretty scary intersection back then, but the innovation in this department has made it such a beautiful intersection now that I kind of miss the old one. But I'll tell you, the job that Exxon was offering, they hired a bunch of us that year, and I told them I would go anywhere in the world. And one of my girlfriends got to go to Louisiana and work on a platform in the Gulf of Mexico. They sent me to New Jersey to supervise construction of service stations. My dad thought this was kind of amusing because I probably could have designed the next, Verrazzano Narrows Bridge, or maybe, a major sewage treatment plant for some major city. And now I was going to have to design quarter-acre, sometimes smaller, lots for trucks to come in and out of, get curb cut permits from you, and get stormwater drainage permits from DEP, none of which I was trained at Duke to do. So I have to tell you, now looking back at 65 years old, that was the best job a 22-year-old could have had, because I learned how to work in the world. I understood that I had to defer to people who knew a whole lot more than I did in order to make things happen on budget, on time, and to work in the world of legislation and rules and town ordinances. I was going to zoning meetings 3 times a week with, some lawyer who was allowed to talk about how we were going to do what we were going to do. And back then, so I graduated from college in 1982. So you can imagine a zoning board seeing, one of their favorite lawyers, and then having him, because it was always a man, stand up and say, "Hey, Joe, Larry, Mo, you know me, it was good to see you last time. Miss Sabatini over here is the engineer for Exxon, can you believe it? She's going to tell you all about this project that she wants to do in neighborhood X." And then he would sit down And for the next 2 or 3 hours, I'd have to advocate why you wanted something that could pollute your groundwater, would be probably a lot more light than you were used to in that neighborhood, and was going to bring big delivery trucks with thousands of gallons of gasoline in and out of your neighborhood. So you can, I think, understand why I decided to be a lawyer. Actually, is anybody in here from Houston? I hope not. Good. The reason I went to law school was they wanted to promote me, which meant moving to Houston. And so I wasn't doing that. So I went to law school. What I will tell you is that I learned back then the importance of understanding context. And context is something that is so important to innovation. You know, we can be brilliant. We can be great at designing things. We can be wonderful, you know, solo practitioners. But if we don't understand the context in which we're working, and if we're not open to rethinking our hypotheses, if we're not open to collaborating across functions and disciplines, we're never going to be able to keep up with the pace of change that we're dealing with now. I'll tell you that in that job, I was responsible for service stations from Route 80 to Cape May. I had a, I don't know, $6 million budget, something like that. And I had to find my way around a state that I thought ended at about the Raritan River with maps, kids, maps. No Google Maps, maps, which I still miss. So when we talk about, I'm going to get the clicker so I can, there we go. When we talk about innovation and when we talk about the future workforce and engaging the talent that we need to address the kinds of challenges you're addressing, we need people who can understand context. We need people who can understand the importance of collaboration across disciplines. But most importantly, we need to engage them so they stay. So let's talk about what it takes to bring all of that together pretty quickly, because right now we're dealing with so much. You know, I look at your mission, which actually is quite inspiring, and I think, like, no one should ever say, no, I don't want to work there, because there are so many wonderful things you can be doing. I'm going to touch on a few different topics. First, you know, how do we attract that talent? And then a little bit about neuroscience, because I think you'll understand in a minute why I'm going to talk about that. And then third, how do we develop high-performing teams? Because really everything we do now happens in teams. There's very little we can design on our own. You know, my first lawyer job at AT&T when I was an environmental lawyer, I was always amazed how Bell Laboratories had these like mazes of hallways of all these solo contributors. And you know, they could make their way in 30 or 40 years all the way up the ladder, and they'd be considered distinguished members of technical staff. And you could like walk down the hall and be like, cubbyhole, 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 and they'd all be in front of their computers, and they'd all be alone doing whatever they were doing. It doesn't look like that anymore. That's not how we design things anymore. So we really have to talk about teams and how to be effective in teams. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do, and here's Mentimeter that Dave was telling you about. The first thing I'd like you to do is turn your phone back on. I'm sure you didn't, because you were just told to mute it. But if you would just use that QR code or go to menti.com and use the code that's up there, you should see a question that says, how are you feeling today? So this is something that I actually do every time I start a class or a workshop or a talk. I'd like to know how you're feeling physically, intellectually, and emotionally. We call it sharing some pie in my team. Whoops, sorry. I gotta do it this way. All right, so. Mentimeter, by the way, will allow you to embed your results right in the slide deck. It's a Microsoft add-in, which, of course, didn't work on this laptop. Oh, I should go to present. Thank you. So here's how you are all feeling today. So you know how word clouds work, right? So the word in the middle, the big word, is the one that more people have selected. So you're feeling good. I'm glad to hear that. Tired, strong, happy. Tired, by the way. I've been talking a lot about burnout with professionals, compliance professionals, legal professionals. Usually when I'm doing that talk, I don't even have to turn around to see the big word in the middle is either tired, exhausted, or drained. So if you are one of those people who chose tired, know that you're not alone. It's out there. I think it's an epidemic across most professions. So the reason I'm asking this is because emotional culture underlies everything that we do in teams. So I'm going to let that keep going. We can come back to it. Oh, and I'm happy to share my slides and the Menti results. So you'll see my email at the end. Feel free to ask me about that. Let's go back to the deck. There we go. Oh, I'm left-handed, so minimize. There we are. Okay. So why am I asking about emotions? Back in the 80s, we of course did not bring our emotions to work, particularly if we were women. It was, you left your emotions in the car in the parking lot. Because so much of what we were dealing with back then, and maybe still today, for women, for people of color, is the emotional tax of wondering if people are taking you seriously, wondering if you're gonna come off knowing what you're doing. Emotions are a huge part of what's going on in our body every day. And in fact, this ancient wisdom about the rider and the elephant, Jonathan Haidt wrote about it in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis. Jonathan Haidt, by the way, is the one who wrote the book about kids being distracted by screen time, the anxious generation. He's a social psychologist who teaches at NYU in ethical leadership. The idea is that the rider is our frontal lobe, is our thinking brain. And the elephant is our emotional self. So if you think about it, that rider is not going to get where the rider needs to go on this elephant without understanding what the elephant needs, right? Because the elephant is, 50 times, maybe more, 500 times heavier, bigger than the rider. So the idea is, if we don't understand what's going on inside ourselves emotionally, we're not going to be able to use our full frontal lobe to do whatever it is we're trying to do, because our emotions are going to take over. This is why we make reactive snap decisions sometimes. This is why when we're feeling exhausted, we can't fully think. That's why napping is good, by the way. I wish I had known that before I was like 60. And then that third thing here, that third bullet point, is a statement I really love from this psychologist. We're not thinking machines that sometimes feel. We're feeling machines that have to try to think. So when it comes to leaving your emotions at the door, you can try to do that, but they're there. And if you manage people, it's important to understand that their emotional self, their elephant, is in the room. So keep that in mind. How do we attract the talent that we need, that the commissioner was talking about? How do we attract that talent and hold on to them? This is a really important question. Dr. Siegel Barstead, who was a psychologist who taught at Wharton, did a lot of work, I would say about 10 years ago, wrote a lot about this concept of emotional culture. And her research showed that the emotions of your team, of the individuals on your team, will impact all of these things. So if what we want are people who feel connected to mission, people who can perform, innovate, and people who will come to work and stay there, we need to understand their emotional self. I really love using Gallup's research when it comes to culture. They are, as some of you probably know, they're probably one of the preeminent sources for culture data, employee perception data. And they do all kinds of surveying. But I thought that this data, this most recent data in there, they do a state of the global workplace report every year. So you can go to their website, gallup.com, and download that. They have tons of research. But this research, I thought, was really interesting. You think that people maybe are leaving because they're not making enough money. Somebody offers them more money. What was interesting, so there are, I don't know, over 200,000 people in this survey. The reasons employees left last year, 68% were a combination of they didn't feel engaged or that they belonged in that culture, and they didn't feel that they could be well, that they could find what they call work-life balance, which I think is a misnomer because it's not a seesaw. It's more like equilibrium. But look at that, 68%, when only 16% were leaving because of compensation and benefits. So, you know, when it comes to attracting and engaging the talent that you need, I would say focus on mission, focus on your culture, and not so much on pay and benefits. I have 3 millennial daughters. One is an organic farmer out in California. The other 2 went corporate. And both of them, they're twins, 33. Both of them changed jobs. One changed twice, one 3 times in their 20s because they weren't learning. That I thought was really kind of amazing. You know, that's about the culture. That's about engagement. And, you know, they were making plenty of money. They were, I think in one case, they were offered more money. But these were lateral moves. So not exactly empirical data, but ask a millennial, you know, why they changed jobs. This point, 42% of those surveyed said that their manager or their employer could have changed their mind, could have done something to keep them. Let's explore what that means. You know, when it comes to employee retention and turnover, sometimes when I talk about engagement, I have to go right to the bottom line thing, right? So the bottom line about turnover is it is expensive to replace people who leave. You know, here's the estimates, right? So if it costs money to replace people, then how many people are looking to leave is a really important data point. And we are now at the highest interest in changing jobs in 10 years. So, and that's a global number. That's not just in the US. So why is that? Why are people disengaged? Why are people feeling that they need to leave? Gallup will tell you that people who are highly engaged are emotionally connected, especially connected to the mission. They feel like what they're doing matters. So let's look at who you think, like I'll tell you, my best boss, I already said this, my best boss was my Exxon boss. I was 22 years old, a nervous wreck, didn't know what I was doing. He put me in a delivery truck with a driver the second day of my job so that I would have context, right? And then gave me a sense that I was capable of solving problems, learning on the job. You know, that was a really important sort of mentor and coach to have in a first job. I've had some wonderful bosses over the last 40 years. I've also had some absolutely horrible, and I would use the word toxic. I would use the word narcissistic, although that has taken on a whole new meaning. I've had some bosses who really like ruined me for a while. So when you think about the best boss that you ever had, how did they make you feel? That's what I would like to hear from you. Yeah. Oh, it's stuck? Okay. So we gotta go here. We gotta go back to here. Oh, did we close Menti? No. So we gotta go here. And we gotta go here. All right. Working now? Okay. Okay. By the way, engineers and scientists, Mentimeter is one of the easiest figure it out for yourself platforms I've ever played with. I'm sure you like doing that. I mean, I love reading directions, like when I'm putting things together, but this, if you want to play with this, there are so many things you can do with the free version of this. I highly recommend it, especially those of you who are teaching. It's a great way to engage your students when you're doing workshops. For those of you who are consultants, it's a great way to get people talking. It's anonymous, right? So you can get people talking. When I teach virtually, it's a way I get people to be part of the conversation. So look at these great words, right? this is how your best boss made you feel. Imagine if all of us could have a boss like this, somewhere, hopefully early, but somewhere in our careers, right? And then the Menti I'm not going to do, because we don't have enough time, is think about the worst boss you ever had and how they made you feel and what these words would look like. It's kind of, you know, you don't want to go to work, right? You don't want to, you're certainly not going to feel comfortable sharing new ideas with a boss who makes you feel less than. So when you look at these words, for those of you who are managing other people, every day, if somebody feels like one of these things, you've done something really important, really powerful. Okay, so, sorry I'm jumping back and forth. I'm sorry, it's a little annoying. Okay, let's see, PowerPoint.
Right there at the bottom.
Oh, not that one, this one. Thank you, Jessica. All right, so we did that. So, you know, what would that word cloud look like was what I kind of wanted you to reflect on. One of the things that Gallup does, and they've been doing for over 30 years, is they have created this framework for managing people that includes an assessment. You can do a culture assessment, an employee, if any of you have ever done an employee engagement survey or employee satisfaction surveys, what we used to call it back in the 90s, they probably are based on this. And the reason I put it here is because I want you to look at the questions that they ask. These are, statements that are in their assessment. And the idea is to use the 5 scale from, you know, strongly disagree to strongly agree. And the highest engaged employees will have lots of strongly agrees on these statements. The one that I put, I bolded some of them because they're quite relevant to the things we're talking about today. But the one that I put in green is because I wanted to talk about your mission today. Because imagine trying to work for, you know, a for-profit company owned by venture capitalists who only care about the bottom line. Like, what's the mission? They can write a mission that might sound good, but the mission in many cases is, are we making more money, right? Are we making double-digit growth? It's really hard, especially if you're 22. It's really hard to connect to a mission like that. But a mission like yours should be easy. And I wanted to share this with you too. The highest engaged employees compared to the lowest, top quartile, bottom quartile. Look at the differences in absenteeism, well-being, turnover, right? It's kind of amazing. Safety and quality, look at those numbers. 63% difference. When you have engaged employees, you have far less safety incidents. You know, I've worked in so many oil and gas and chemical companies where safety first was one of our values, just like it's one of yours. And we talked about safety data every month. And we talked about creating a safety culture. You know, a safety culture is about making sure that we're taking care of each other, not just ourselves. And I have used that concept, you know, the idea that, you know, if I went out on a job site or I went into a clean room without my goggles or my hat, my hard hat or my steel-toed shoes, whatever, wherever I am. If somebody said to me, Debbie, where are your goggles? I wouldn't say something, you know, some expletive. I would say, oh, Jessica, thank you. I don't know where my head is today, right? That's what safety culture is about. Friends don't let friends do unsafe things. Friends don't let friends drive drunk. That's you know, that's a safety culture, right? Why can't we do that with well-being generally? Because if we have wellness in our workplace, we're going to have far more productivity, creativity, and innovation, right? So I love that engaged employees can show you it can make a safer workplace. Here's your mission. I honestly, if I were 22, no, because that was a really great job. If when I left at 25 because I didn't want to go to Houston, if somebody wanted to hire me into this mission, I'd have gone in a heartbeat. And frankly, I think that if you're remembering to connect to this mission with the people on your team, really nobody should be bored. I think there's a lot to do. So pick something if you're, wondering how you're going to attract a new employee, and talk about how you do any of these things. I would imagine it's going to be like a magnet. And then your values. Values are the other thing. You heard Dave talk about, and I work a lot with values. If your values are real, if people feel like you live the values, like the senior leaders believe in the values, they're going to feel really proud to be part of this organization. And when I see integrity there, that, to me, that means an awful lot. We have professional codes of ethics, both as engineers and as lawyers. And integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard. Even when there might be somebody who shoots you down for it, you do the right thing. And so to have that as a value is a really important magnet also. If somebody is interviewed and starts talking to people in the organization about your mission and values, you want them to be real. You want them to feel like that's really how we do things here. So belonging, feeling connected to the mission and the values, is very important to engagement. When people feel that they belong, so look at this data, right? When people feel that their opinion matters, that they can share ideas, that they're supporting the mission. Right now, the sort of the average is 3 in 10 in the Gallup data. 3 in 10 employees feel connected, feel that their opinion matters. Gallup has calculated these differences if you could double that. That's why those engaged employees have less turnover, less safety incidents. I wanted to point out this other statement about being psychological owners. It means that connecting to the mission is something that makes people feel proud, right? When we're a psychological owner, we take responsibility, we take accountability. And when you have that on a team, you can trust each other to maybe push back or to remind each other when we're not sticking with the mission or when we're getting outside the scope of work. That's a very important part of collaborative teamwork. So the neuroscience, so the emotional thing that I asked you about in the beginning is partly because of the emotional culture work I mentioned, but it's also because when we want to have emotional regulation, right? When we want to say, oh, I'm so frustrated, or I'm so angry, or I'm so nervous about this presentation, or whatever you're feeling, if you can name it. So Susan David, who's a great psychologist, follow her on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, she's always got great nuggets. She wrote a book called Emotional Agility. The idea is if you can name it and then accept it, and then make a choice about what that feeling is trying to tell you, then you can make a rational decision. You can get back to using this part of your brain about how you're going to deal with whatever it is that's frustrating you or angering you or whatever. Viktor Frankl's quote, I'm sure you've heard this, right? The space between stimulus and response is where we can make choices about not being reactive, but being responsive. And so in our interactions with each other, when we're frustrated or when we feel like somebody's not hearing us and we want to snap back at someone, if we just take a breath and say, why am I feeling this way? Is there a different way that I could respond that might move us forward instead of getting us stuck in some sort of, lock? I thought you'd appreciate this. Brené Brown, who I happen to like, not everybody loves her, I happen to love her. Brené Brown is a psychologist who's done a lot of research, and when she talks about this quote, she puts it in this formula, right? Stimulus, 2 parentheses, response. And so what she says is this space is about sticking your foot in there between those 2 parentheses and making enough space so that you're responding and not reacting. I really love that. So what are the benefits of emotional agility? There's so much more that we can do individually and as managers when we can do what Susan David says. She says, name it to tame it, right? Name what we're feeling. Maybe also ask other people how they're feeling, like I did with you. And if somebody in your team says they're tired, frustrated, feeling unsupported, that's a challenging thing to say, but you want to ask why that is, right? Or maybe you don't want to do it in the meeting. Maybe you want to say, wow, I'm really sorry you're feeling that way. Let's talk after the meeting. And if there's something I can do to help, let's talk about it, right? It's not an easy place to be because it's vulnerable. But if you as the manager can be a little vulnerable first, you know, I'm tired too. Let's talk about what we're doing and how we could maybe set some better boundaries so that we're both getting more rest. When a manager does that, it's easier for everybody else to do it. Let's talk a little bit about psychological safety. We don't always use it the way it should be used. Psychological safety is not about being comfortable. It's about feeling safe to share things that you might feel are threatening. So every time we walk into a room or we meet somebody new or whatever it is, we automatically do a threat assessment, right? So I walk into a lecture hall like this, and all of my old stuff about college and law school and teaching, and it's all there, right? Is this going to be a threatening environment, or is this going to be an environment where I can perform and bring my whole self to performing? So that psychological safety comes from faces. It comes from knowing who you were before I got here, right? But it all happens automatically. When we feel unsafe, we go into the fight, flight, freeze, right? When we feel safe, we can perform, we can create, we can innovate. So there are 2 books. So this is going to be like book club now for the rest of this talk. There are, and I'm a terrible reader, by the way. Don't ask me how I got through law school. It's amazing to me. Audible was the best invention in the world. These 2 people, Amy Edmondson and Tim Clark, are the sort of more contemporary people. People have been talking about psychological safety in psychology for 40 or 50 years. These 2 have written these 2 books that have become sort of the center of the discussion about how we create it in teams. So the fearless organization is Amy Edmondson, the idea that you want people to flag issues. Tim Clark will tell you it's about rewarded vulnerability and that it's not expensive to be yourself. So I've got in the slides, and as I said, I'm happy to share these. I've got in the slides some of his work about the 4 stages of psychological safety. You have to feel that you can belong before you can learn, make mistakes, contribute ideas, innovate, and challenge the status quo. That's what his challenger safety is about. There are examples of breaches. It's not just you said something and got fired. It can be somebody stepped on you in a meeting. That feels psychologically unsafe. There are lots of different breaches. There are also costs of breaches that he has calculated, and others. There's SHRM research, there's McKinsey research, about the things that happen when people don't feel psychologically safe. So the one at the bottom, they left their job because of uncivil treatment. That does happen. It's a small number, but look at 78% said their commitment to the organization declined. So if you have people who feel connected to your mission, but they feel that they aren't safe to speak up about better ways of doing things, you're going to lose them. They're not going to participate. This is something I could talk for 3 hours about, because in the compliance and ethics world, one of the things that we work very hard to do is create an environment where people will raise issues about wrongdoing, right? Ethical and legal wrongdoing. What I've learned over the years is you can't just start there. People have to feel safe to do other things. I find the leaders in organizations who've created that innovative, creative space for their team, and they're the ones who become my first champions for speaking up about wrongdoing. Because it's only about a half a step farther. In fact, I've told Tim Clark, you really need like a step 4.5, because when it comes to talking about wrongdoing, that's not necessarily challenging the status quo. That's challenging bad behavior, and that's much harder. So here's another one. This is an oldie, but a goodie. Warren Bennis was one of the sort of the grandfathers of ethical leadership. And he and this team wrote this. It's a small book about transparency, but I thought you'd appreciate that this idea that information flow is the nervous system, right? If we hoard information, if we don't share, if we don't work across disciplines, we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of things. We have to be able to share information. And this is an article I wrote for Harvard Business Review. Again, looking at the value, the strategic value of psychological safety helps you get managers on board. You know, I think in the interest of time, what do we have, like 5 minutes, right? 8? Okay. This is something that I would love to ask you about, because this is something that we sometimes have a perception that's off. So when you think about your organization, whether it's your team or your department, whatever, your firm, when somebody speaks up with an idea or concern, you know, how often does that happen? And when they do, are people listening, actively listening? So do I have to, has it gone to the next question? Okay. That's that one. Okay. So this is a slider. So 0 is no one speaks up, 10 is everyone speaks up. 0 is everyone listens, 10, excuse me, no one listens, 10 is everyone listens. This is something I've done in factories with the plant manager in the room, who I've prepped. And I actually do it by asking people to come up and stand on a number line. So like I'm standing on 5, and that's 0, and that's 10. And I have the managers come up first. And then you can imagine, managers think everyone's speaking up, they're all over here, right? And then everyone in the audience is giggling, and they kind of wonder why. And then I say, why are you standing there? And why are you giggling? And then the next question is actively listening. And so because they've heard the giggling, they kind of move this way. But nobody's lower than maybe 4.5. And then they sit down, and I ask their people to come up, and it's a very different answer. And so then we can talk about why that is and how we can fix it, right? So here's where you are. Shocking, right around 5. You know, if we did a culture assessment and asked people this question, there would be a range of answers, and there would be a range of reasons. And it's because managers all over the organization are behaving differently. So what I'm seeing here is managers are a little bit better at creating a speaking up environment than the average. The average is, in my experience, is like 3.5 or 4. Okay, so we're probably not going to have time to do this, but I'd like you to think about collaboration. Yeah, go right ahead and do this one. One of the things that I wanted to talk about with collaboration is the idea of, we now have 4 or 5 generations in the workplace, right? So let me jump ahead to that, because I think this is an important piece. There we go. This is an important piece of thinking collaboratively. There's a book here, by the way. If anybody hasn't read it, please read it. It's, you know, it'll take you 2 hours. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and he talks about trust being the foundation for cohesive teams. And he writes in fable style. He writes so that you could read it on a plane. Small, but like 5 by 7, it's about a ½ inch thick. But this goes back to vulnerability that I was talking about before, and psychological safety. The idea is, if you can trust, you can debate respectfully, and then you can commit together to row the boat in the same direction, and that's how we get to results. We hold each other accountable. Okay, so generations. So I wanted to see who's here, because for the first time, I guess it was late 2023, Gen Z has now has surpassed baby boomers in the workplace in the US. This is Department of Labor stuff, okay? So I've had to change my multi-generational talk a little bit, but the traditional list, so like my dad, my 93-year-old dad, would be part of that 1%. But Millennials and Gen Xers are running everything. And the rest of us, the boomers and the Gen Zers, are in the workplace. Many baby boomers are still in management and leadership. And so we have all these different generations that have to communicate and collaborate. So I want to see where you are, and then we can wrap up. All right, there we are. All right. Yay, baby boomers are still here. All right, so look, this is exactly what Department of Labor was saying, right? So how do we communicate differently? And what I would hope you'll consider is that the stereotypes about how we communicate are not necessarily correct. So like, I can text. My children, who are millennials, love to text with me. I don't love it. They are very quick. I'm answering you, and then you text, but I'm answering, right? And so I say, can we get on FaceTime? Nobody responds, right? And then I go back to the one who started the conversation, and I dial her phone. She is texting, and she does not pick up. You have the freaking phone in your hand. Answer me, right? So put that in the workplace. So how do we deal with that, right? How do we deal with that? My generation had to get used to email. We love email. And email is a great way to save everything. And so if you're dealing with a baby boomer, it's probably better to talk to them in person. But if you don't want to do that, email them. And actually, a lot of my Gen Xers like email also. The great thing about email is, go back to Susan David, stimulus, response, right? You can decide what you're going to say, and when you're on the phone or in person, you don't always get your foot in the parentheses, right? So I would ask that you consider how to communicate with the generations that are on your team. All right, so to wrap up, here's where I want to go. There are a couple other books here that I will recommend. This one, which is, don't think that you have more in common with your generation than other generations, because we all lived through a lot of things together. That's period effects like COVID. Life cycle effects. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma. I might have more in common with a Gen Xer than with baby boomers who never had kids or don't have grandchildren, right? So just focusing on what they call cohort effects is not fair. And then, all right, can I just do this quickly? Okay, thank you. So does everybody know about this Tacoma Narrows Bridge, 1940, Galloping Gertie? It was like doing this, right? It collapsed 4 months after it was built. And we knew how to make suspension bridges. We had really good suspension bridges. There's one in Brooklyn, right? They did not consider the context of the wind in the Puget Sound going from, vertical lift to torsion, and they changed the suspensions to flat bars. So there was, torsion as opposed to flexibility that would give it stability. So what did we learn? We learned that context was important. They also apparently did not consult an engineer who knew what they were doing. This one over here is my generational example. How many of you have a push button start in your car? Okay. How many of you remember when you had to use a key, right? So at some point, the keyhole lit up. Wasn't that great? So why did we go from that to this? Mercedes had some old person on the team who said, I'm having trouble finding the keyhole. They may not have been the ones who lit it up. I'm thinking it was an American. But that person was the one who said, why do we need a key? Can't we have a push button? Because it'll be so much easier. If that had been a bunch of millennials or Gen Zers, They might never have put a push button start in that car, right? But now everybody has push button starts in the car. That's a cross-functional, cross-disciplinary, multi-generational team. Okay, so that's the other book. Perennials is about who cares what our generations are. Miscommunication leads to problems. And if we want to have, sorry, another HBR article. If we want to have solutions that really work, we have to be willing to challenge our own assumptions. We have to clean off the windows that are our assumptions. And so this book is a must-read. He talks about thinking like a scientist. Has anybody read this book? Adam Grant is a great organizational psychologist, and I wanted to end with, he puts us on a pedestal. If you can think like a scientist or an engineer, it's because we're trained to challenge our own assumptions. And he talks about preachers, politicians, and prosecutors as sort of archetypes. Preachers will tell you how it has to be, and they don't really care what you have to say. Politicians will go along with you, whatever you're saying, and prosecutors will challenge everything you say. But if you think like a scientist, you'll be able to innovate because you'll have the humility to try new things. So that's where I wanted to end. Think about how you can bring these kinds of critical thinking skills, emotional agility, psychological safety, and multi-generational collaboration into your work. I think it will attract and retain the talent you're looking for. Okay. One of my favorites. So, sorry we don't have time for questions because I told you too many stories, but I'll be here today. I'm happy to chat. I know we have a break now, right? A little break. And if you want these slides or the mentees, I'll be happy to send those to you. My email's here. There. And connect with me on LinkedIn. I really would love to do that. If you're not on LinkedIn, young people, get on LinkedIn. Old people, get on LinkedIn. This is how we learn. This is how we make connections. All right, thanks very much.